All right, everyone, make sure you have your note sheet ready. We're taking a look at World War One. The first thing that we want to talk about is, the statement that I have beneath the image that you see there. So as European countries went to war in 1914, governments flourished, patriotism bloomed, and class struggles stirred, and young men died in frightful numbers. The first thing I want you to get is that the United States did not join in the conflict, truly fighting, until 1917. So while I don't have a slide for it, the mastery question I want you to be able to answer is what caused World War One, and why did the United States enter the war? So just to reiterate some of the things that we had talked about yesterday and some of the basic causes of World War One, I'd like to equate it to a fire, as you see here. So there's a lot of things going on. Let's walk through what this is. The first thing, and this is not in chronological order, but just level of importance in terms of how the war actually got going. The first thing that caused World War I is the assassination of Archduke Francis Ferdinand, the heir to the throne of Austria-Hungary, while on a visit to Sarajevo, which is the capital city of Austria-Hungary's province of Bosnia. The man who assassinated him, his name was Gavrilo Princip, was a member of a Serbian organization that believed Bosnia rightfully belonged to Serbia. So we have a situation that I guess we could see is very related to an imperialist motive of a larger country taking over a smaller country, and in this case, a smaller country acting out. The next thing would be militarism. So for some European leaders, the question was not so much if a great war would start, but when it would begin. So in order to prepare, leaders increased the size of their armies, stockpiled weapons, but no nation really readied its war machinery more than Germany. It built up a large navy to rival Great Britain, who was the world's strongest navy at the time, and to keep up, Great Britain also increased the size of its rather large navy. The third thing that I'm showing you in this little map that just came up is a region known as the Balkans, southeastern Europe, and those countries for the most part were under control of Austria-Hungary until some started to gain independence. So in the late 1800s, many nations believed that a nation should express nationalism of a single ethnic group. So for example, the French longed to avenge its humiliating defeat by a collection of German states in 1871 and regain a territory known as Alsace-Lorraine, which is directly between Germany and France. Nationalism also destabilized empires such as Austria-Hungary. This was true in the Balkan region. For example, when Serbia emerged as an independent nation in 1878, it challenged Austria-Hungary by trying to gain territory controlled by where the Serbs lived, and by the example it offered to Austria-Hungary diverse peoples. We could also say that there was advanced capitalist countries fighting over boundaries, such as in the Balkans and even places like the Middle East. And the final thing, and as I skip to another slide, is that European leaders also prepared for war by forming alliances. So by 1914, two major alliances emerged. And first, take a look at the definition of an alliance. So an agreement between two or more countries to defend each other in times of war. So the first one, if you take a look at the map, would be in red, which would be the Triple Alliance: Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Italy. Important to note that while Italy was part of it, they never really fought on the side of the Triple Alliance. The opposition to the Triple Alliance was the Triple Entente, which made up of France, Russia, and Great Britain. So, as I mentioned, alliances emboldened leaders to act recklessly. They knew that if they declared war, powerful allies were obligated to fight along with them. So the true question that we're going to concern ourselves with is where did the United States stand when all this was occurring? Before we get to that, I want you to take a look at this map and notice two things. This is a two-front war. So if you look at France, right on the border here, we're seeing where it says Western Front. This is where Great Britain and France primarily would fight Germany on this end of it. Trench warfare was very well seen within these areas. On the the Eastern Front, over here we have Russia primarily fighting Austria-Hungary and to a certain extent Germany. So, as I said, where did the United States stand while all this was occurring? So, Wilson promised that the United States would stay neutral, as you see in this quote here. The United States must be neutral, in fact, as well as a name during these days to try men's souls. We must be impartial in thought as well as in action, must put a curb upon our sentiments as well as upon every transaction that might be construed as a preference of one party to the struggle before another. So, in essence, as we live in a melting pot nation of diverse origins, Wilson did not want to see the war set Americans against Americans. So, gruesome conditions, this is going on in Europe, for men in fighting allowed people to see the reality of trench warfare, the horrors of modern war. Machine guns, artillery field guns, poison gas, submarines, tanks, airplanes led to all type of war that had not yet been seen before. So a good example of this is a battle in 1914 known as Battle of the Marne between the British and French and German. The result of it is that we see upwards of 400,000 casualties for either side. If we fast forward 2 years in the Battle of Verdun, same groups, British and French fighting the Germans, results in 600,000 casualties. And by casualties, we mean those who were killed and or wounded. And then the Battle of the Somme in 17, 300,000 British casualties alone. And as you see, some guys here leaving the trench, heading into no man's land to attack the opposing trench, which was quite a ways away. Many who moved unsuccessfully over there. The thing I want you to first introduce is that during the war, British leaders decided to use their navy to blockade Germany to keep essential goods from reaching the other country. So usually international law, allowed contraband goods, such as weapons and other items used to fight a war were generally confiscated. Non-contraband items, food, medical supplies, other non-military items, those could not be confiscated. As the war continued, Great Britain expanded its definition of contraband until it virtually encompassed any product. So in response to this, if you take a look at the image on the right here, Germany responded by sinking Allied ships using U-boats or submarines. So as we'll get to in a few moments, the reality of the German blockade struck America and allies, as we see, the British passenger liner, the Lusitania, and later the French passenger ship, the Sussex, were sunk in 1915 and 1916, respectively. While Wilson hoped to avoid the conflict, even running his re-election in 1916 with the slogan, "He kept us out of the war," we'll see that we're slowly getting dragged into it more and more. April 1917, Germany announces that they would resume sinking any ships bringing supplies to their enemies. And this was after they had curtailed this for a little while, not completely stopped. But the reason that they restarted this was that it was unrealistic for Germans to treat the United States as neutral in a war when they were shipping to Germany's enemies. Not long after this occurs, on April 6, 1917, the United States declares war on Germany. So the question becomes, why? Well, as it says here, why did the United States enter the war on the side of Great Britain and allies? We have a couple of usual reasons. The first usual reason is that in 1915, the British passenger liner, the Lusitania, I guess we could say it's equivalent to a cruise ship, was torpedoed and sunk by a German submarine. It sank in 15 minutes. It killed almost 1,200 people, and 1198 to be exact, of which were 124 Americans. The thing that I want to share with you is that, this was not just innocent cargo aboard in terms of people. It actually carried thousands of cases of ammunition that were intended to go to Britain. The second of the usual reasons is known as the Zimmermann Telegram. So it was a proposed alliance between Germany and Mexico, stating that if the United States declared war on Germany, Mexico should declare war on the United States. In return, after a German victory, Mexico would get back the states of Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, all of which it had lost in 1848 after being defeated in the Mexican-American War. So although Mexico had no intent of attacking the United States, the British interception of this telegram would eventually lead President Wilson to ask for a declaration of war from Congress. So what are the other reasons? There really are, I'm going to say there's 4 other reasons that we want to go through here.
Lisa marks the counseling.
So we have the cultural connections. That's the first of our reasons. The language connection with the British. About 80% of Americans had ties to Britain, usually through ancestry. We also can make the connection to France in that they were a traditional ally. They were the ones who helped us during the American Revolution against the British. But at the same point in time, we had 8 million people with ties to Germany who lived in America. Similarly, there were 4 million Irish immigrants with great hatred for the British due to the centuries of Great Britain's domination of their homeland. They hoped that Ireland would gain independence as Britain became entangled in war. We also have the economic connections. So as we take a look at this map right here, as you can see in the years leading up to the war, this number right here, as it's pointing to both Great Britain and to France, shows that the United States traded 4 times as much with the British and the French than with any other European nation. If the United States did not get involved in this conflict and help these allies, and the war in Europe raged on, and in the event that Great Britain and France had lost, the United States could have lost this trade, and it could have led to a major economic depression. So if we take a look at the number to the right, 1914, there was a recession, but $2 billion in goods to the Allies stimulated the economy. The industrial benefit, if you take a look just at U.S. Steel alone, made $348 million off of, steel that would be used eventually for war goods. We also can equate this to bank losses. So this point could be further emphasized by how much we loaned to the Allies. $2.3 billion were loaned to the Allies versus $27 million which were given to the Allies of the Triple Alliance. So if these loans were not repaid, it could also lead to bank failures for the United States, a major economic impact. There's also the desire to become a world power. So prior to Taft and Wilson being president, we talked about how Roosevelt advocated for a war in order to showcase America's growing military might. As it says, he felt the need for a war to, the United States to demonstrate that they were a world power. So while the Spanish-American War and the war in the Philippines were just as much about obtaining land, it was also about showcasing power. Wilson also called it a war to end all wars and to make the world safe for democracy. But it was to show that the United States was a superpower that could be matched with Great Britain and Germany. There's also the difficulties of naval warfare. So German submarines we felt were paying unfairly, and this kind of can be seen based upon the amount of Allied and neutral tonnage that was sunk by the Germans during World War I. As you can see from the numbers of August 1914 all the way through, let's just say, March of 1918, that number goes up significantly. But we got to realize that there's some opposition to this war as well. So when President Wilson asked for a Congress to vote and give him a declaration of war, Congress votes 373 to. So if we compare this to the Spanish-American War, in which the vote in the House of Representatives was 311 to 6, we realize that 50 no votes is a lot. Initially, we only have 73,000 people volunteer for the war. So as a result, Congress overwhelmingly votes for a draft, or what we call conscription. The soldiers, the American troops during this time, known as doughboys, 300,000 would evade the draft. But we also see, we'll come back to this later, there's individuals who are against it. Farmers were predominantly against the war because many were German immigrants. And those that weren't German immigrants knew that their sons, who were their workforce of their farms, might be asked to fight. Socialists were individuals who advocated for government ownership and control of the means of production and distribution. Gained great support as they also spoke out against the war. And obviously, German Americans as well as Irish Americans. What we're going to take a look at going forward is what's going to go on the home front. How is modern warfare going to change this, and what is the fear of apathy that is taking place during this conflict that the government is trying to avoid?